The dazzling lights reflected off the water as the luxurious yacht Aurora glided smoothly across the ocean. Daniel Whitmore, a young tech billionaire, stood on the deck, a whiskey glass in hand, his sharp gaze sweeping over the elite guests, indulging in the extravagant party. "Dan, you'll never settle down," Michael Carter, a venture capitalist, smirked. Daniel shrugged, half amused. "Marriage is just a contract. If I wanted to, I could marry anyone." Ryan Brooks, a famous sports agent, narrowed his eyes. "Oh yeah? Then prove it." Michael suddenly laughed, raising his glass. "How about a bet? Marry an ordinary girl tonight. Not for love, not for money, just to prove that marriage means nothing." Daniel smirked. Challenge accepted. The ocean breeze swept across the yacht's deck as Daniel squinted, scanning the crowd. "So, who's the lucky bride?" Michael and Ryan exchanged mischievous looks before glancing toward the pier. Under the dim streetlights, a small seaside bar remained open. Behind the counter, a young woman with soft brown hair expertly mixed drinks, completely oblivious to the group of wealthy men nearby. Michael smirked. Her, the bartender. Ryan burst out laughing. "Perfect! She'll probably lose her mind if a billionaire proposes tonight." Daniel's gaze lingered on the girl, Emma Caldwell, a familiar name among the regulars of this bar. She moved effortlessly, confident yet detached, showing no interest in the luxurious world around her. Interesting. Daniel stood, strolling toward the bar. As he approached, Emma didn't even glance at him, calmly wiping a glass. He tapped the counter lightly. "I have a proposal for you." Emma glanced up, her tone indifferent. "If it's about another drink, we stop serving alcohol after 11. Daniel smirked. "Not a drink, a marriage." Emma blinked, then laughed. But it wasn't a shocked or flustered laugh. It was sharp, almost amused. "You're making a bet with your friends, aren't you?" Daniel paused for a second. "How did you know?" Emma tilted her head, eyes gleaming with amusement. "Men like you? I can spot them a mile away." Daniel grinned. "Fascinating." Emma raised an eyebrow. "So, what's in it for me?" "A luxurious life. A single night that could change everything." Emma considered for a moment, then shrugged. "Fine. Let's get married." Daniel froze. He hadn't expected her to say yes. But a game was a game. "Then let's go." The luxurious limousine glided smoothly along the coastal highway, heading toward a small chapel in Las Vegas. Daniel leaned back, watching Emma in the dim glow of the car's interior. This girl was too calm. Most women would be panicking, shaking, or giddy with excitement if a billionaire proposed marriage out of nowhere. But Emma, she simply stared out the window, as if this was just another ordinary night. "Aren't you curious?" Daniel finally broke the silence. Emma shrugged. "We both have our reasons for doing this. I don't need to know yours." Daniel chuckled. "Practical." "What did you expect?" Emma turned to him, teasing. "A naive girl crying tears of joy?" Daniel had no response. They arrived at the small chapel, where a priest greeted them with a skeptical expression. But when Daniel casually placed a thick check on the table, all doubts vanished. "Are you both absolutely sure about this?" the priest asked, still hesitant. Daniel, unwavering, "Absolutely." Emma, with a mysterious smile, more certain than ever. They exchanged rings. The ceremony was brief, no flowers, no guests, no grand celebration. As Daniel signed the marriage certificate, a strange feeling settled in his chest. Something felt off. It wasn't until everything was finalized that he realized one crucial detail. This marriage was legally binding. They were now, in every sense of the word, husband and wife. The soft morning light filtered through the curtains, casting golden streaks across the marble walls. Daniel opened his eyes, his mind still groggy from the surreal events of the night before. He turned, expecting to see his new wife panicking, but the bed beside him was empty. Frowning slightly, Daniel sat up, scanning the luxurious penthouse suite. No sign of a flustered girl freaking out over marrying a billionaire. Instead, Emma sat calmly on the sofa, legs crossed elegantly, a porcelain coffee cup resting between her fingers. She looked completely at ease. No rush, no hesitation, no confusion. Daniel folded his arms, leaning against the table. "What are you doing here?" Emma gently placed her coffee down, her gaze cool and unreadable. "I'm your wife. Of course I'm here." Daniel paused for a second. "My wife?" The words felt strange. He stepped closer, observing her carefully. Emma didn't look like a poor girl who just hit the jackpot. In fact, there was an unmistakable refinement in the way she moved, the way she sipped her coffee, the way she gazed out the window. She wasn't just a bartender. Daniel sat across from her. "You don't find this strange?" Emma raised an eyebrow. "Strange how? You just married a complete stranger. You're now the wife of a billionaire." Emma simply turned her coffee cup in her hands, her voice smooth. "If I were just an ordinary girl, yes, I might be panicking." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "What are you saying?" Emma smiled slightly. "You really think I'm just a bartender?" Daniel's heartbeat slowed. He had met hundreds of frauds, gold diggers, corrupt businessmen, liars, and he could always see through them. But Emma? She didn't act greedy. She didn't act afraid. She didn't try to impress him. She just existed with complete self-assurance. For the first time, Daniel felt like something was wrong, and that made him desperate to find out who she really was. That night, when Emma thought he was asleep, Daniel silently made a phone call. "Get me everything on Emma Caldwell, now." He needed answers, and he would get them. Daniel was not the type of man to be deceived easily. After that strange conversation that morning, he began watching Emma more closely. And the more he observed, the more he realized something wasn't right. That evening, Daniel brought Emma to an exclusive business gala, a gathering of top entrepreneurs, politicians, and investors. His goal? To see how she would react. He expected her to hesitate, feel out of place, or at the very least make a small mistake. But as they stepped into the grand ballroom, Emma remained completely composed. She effortlessly picked up a glass of champagne, offering a polite smile when an older gentleman approached her. James Wellington, a renowned real estate tycoon. Daniel stood at a distance, silently observing. James raised his glass. "Are you interested in investment markets, Mrs. Whitmore?" Emma smiled slightly, lifting her glass in response. "Real estate does have potential, but any investment requires a long-term strategy." James raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You seem quite knowledgeable." Emma took a slow sip of her drink, her gaze sharp. "I simply enjoy learning." Daniel nearly dropped his whiskey glass. No ordinary bartender could speak so fluently and precisely with one of the most powerful businessmen in the industry. That night, back at the penthouse, Daniel could no longer suppress his curiosity. He sat across from Emma, his voice low and firm. "Who are you really?" Emma didn't even blink at the question. She calmly set her wine glass down, leaning back against the couch, her eyes unreadable. "So you've started to suspect?" Daniel's grip on his glass tightened. "I don't like being played." Emma smirked. "Who said I was playing you?" Daniel leaned forward, his sharp gaze locking onto hers. "An ordinary bartender doesn't have the grace of an aristocrat, doesn't speak to top investors like an expert." Emma was silent for a moment before sighing. "Fine, I'll tell you the truth." Daniel felt his heartbeat slow for a second as Emma held his gaze, her voice steady but powerful. "I'm not just a bartender, I am the heiress to the Caldwell financial empire." The air in the room grew heavy after Emma's declaration. Daniel remained silent for a few seconds, his eyes locked onto hers. The heiress to the Caldwell financial empire. Then he laughed, a low, humorless chuckle. "So I'm the one who got played." Emma didn't deny it, she simply lifted her glass, taking a small sip. Daniel tightened his grip on his whiskey. "You planned this from the start, didn't you?" Emma set her glass down, meeting his gaze directly. "I didn't lie. I just took advantage of an opportunity." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "An opportunity for what?" Emma leaned back into the couch, her voice calm. "To escape my family?" At the Caldwell estate the same night, Victoria Caldwell sat behind a massive oak desk, her expression unreadable as she scanned the report before her. Emma was married. She set her teacup down, the porcelain clinking softly against the saucer. A man in a black suit stepped forward, his voice low. "Ma'am, we've prepared falsified evidence of financial fraud. If released at the right moment, Emma will be eliminated from succession." Victoria's lips curled into a cold smile. "Good. We'll end this at the Caldwell Gala." 3 days later, the Caldwell Gala. Daniel stood beside Emma in the grand hall of Caldwell Enterprises, a glass of whiskey in hand, his sharp gaze scanning the room carefully. He knew something was wrong. And at that moment, a man in a dark suit stepped onto the stage, his voice echoing through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight I bring you urgent news regarding the Caldwell heir." The LED screen behind him lit up, preparing to display the fabricated evidence against Emma. Emma stiffened slightly. But before the files could appear, the screen glitched, then suddenly switched to a series of leaked emails. Clear proof that Victoria Caldwell had orchestrated the entire fraud. The entire room fell into stunned silence. Victoria shot up from her chair, her face paling. "This is..." Daniel calmly set his glass down and stepped forward. His voice was smooth but carried a razor-sharp edge. "Did you really think you could play this game without me knowing?" Victoria was completely defeated. Emma turned to Daniel, her voice filled with emotion. "You did all this? For me?" Daniel simply looked at her, a soft chuckle escaping, but his gaze was warm. "For you, and because I hate losing." The party was over, but Emma's thoughts weren't. She stood on the penthouse balcony, quietly watching the city lights flicker below. Daniel stepped up behind her, saying nothing, simply standing beside her. Emma finally spoke. "You can leave, you know. You don't have to stay." Daniel raised an eyebrow, turning to face her. "Why would I leave?" Emma took a slow breath, turning to look at him. "This marriage, it was supposed to be a game." Daniel stepped closer, his voice low. "What do you think it is now?" Emma didn't answer right away, but when Daniel gently tilted her chin up, her eyes gave him the answer. This time, when he kissed her, it wasn't a bet anymore. It was a choice. In the days that followed, the media swarmed Caldwell Enterprises, exposing every fraud she had orchestrated. The company's board, unwilling to let her tarnish their legacy further, wasted no time in stripping her of all authority. Her assets were frozen, her influence shattered. The woman who once dictated Emma's fate now had no control over her own. As Victoria walked out of Caldwell Tower for the last time, cameras flashed wildly. Reporters threw accusations her way, but she ignored them, her lips pressed into a thin, bitter line. "This isn't over," she muttered under her breath. But as she glanced back at the towering building, she knew the truth. For her, it already was. With nowhere left to turn, Victoria disappeared from the public eye. The woman who once controlled everything now had nothing. Not power, not money, not influence. And for the first time in her life, she was truly alone. At first, they were just two people bound by a reckless bet. But as time passed, their world quietly shifted. The late-night conversations turned into something deeper, filled with laughter, secrets, and unspoken emotions. Silent glances across the room became meaningful. The way Emma absent-mindedly touched his wrist when talking, the way Daniel looked at her when she wasn't watching. It all changed. They weren't just tolerating each other anymore. They were slowly falling in love. Daniel saw beyond Emma's strength and intelligence. He saw a woman who had been hurt, controlled, and forced to fight alone for too long. Emma, too, realized Daniel wasn't just an arrogant billionaire. He was a man who had always longed for something real, someone who would choose him for who he was, not for his wealth. One night, the rhythmic sound of rain tapping against the window filled the quiet penthouse. The dim glow of the fireplace cast flickering shadows across the room. Daniel and Emma sat close, their fingers lightly touching on the couch, a forgotten glass of wine on the table between them. Their conversation had started as casual banter, but as the night deepened, so did their words. They spoke of past heartbreaks, of childhood dreams lost and found, of fears they never admitted to anyone else. For the first time, there were no lies, no pretense, just them, raw and unguarded. They had been talking for hours about life, their pasts, the scars they had never shared with anyone else. Emma rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, absent-mindedly tracing circles on the back of his hand. "I never believed in love," she whispered. Daniel let out a soft chuckle, his voice deep. "Neither did I, until I met you." Emma lifted her gaze, her deep brown eyes locking onto his. "And now? Do you believe?" Daniel didn't answer with words. Instead, he cupped her face gently, pressing a soft but longing kiss on her lips. That night, nothing else existed. No contracts, no past, no expectations. Just them. The way Daniel traced his fingers along her cheek, the way Emma's breath hitched as he whispered her name, it was slow, unhurried, as if time itself had paused for them. For the first time, Emma allowed herself to be vulnerable, to give in to something real. And in Daniel's arms, she found not just passion, but a love she never thought she could have. 3 months later, a grand wedding took place at a luxurious seaside estate, surrounded by fresh flowers, candlelight, and the warmth of loved ones. Emma walked down the aisle in a breathtaking white gown, her eyes shining as she met Daniel's. He reached for her hand, squeezing it lightly, a silent promise that from this day forward, they would always walk together. Before everyone, Daniel brought her hand to his lips and whispered, "Emma, I vow to love you, not just for a lifetime, but for 100 years." Emma smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "I vow the same, Daniel." As their lips met, fireworks lit up the night sky. And with that, their story truly began, a love that was meant to last forever.